Ready? Hi, my name's Lenny Sharon. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in the state of Maine. When I was first asked to tell a story, they suggested maybe I tell a story about an innocent client. And I started to think about it, and all three of my innocent clients over 40 years of practice are boring. So, yeah, it's like the murderers and the dope dealers and the embezzlers. They're funny, but they're not innocent. So I thought back to 1970, and it's in Pittsburgh where I grew up, and we had started out a law school, a law collective. That was a gathering of lawyers, legal workers, law hanger-on dogs. We had a guy whose name was Ralph Moore. His name was Brother Ralph, who was our jailhouse lawyer. Ralph had done time in a local penitentiary, done enough time that he learned a little bit of law. So it was cool to have him around. He befriended most of the people in the penitentiary. We had clients rent in place, go talk to him all the time. So Ralph, he was living about a half an hour from the law collective, and he decided he'd like to buy a car, and he'd asked me if I knew anybody from whom he could get a loan. I had gone to law school with this one guy. We didn't have anything in common, but he became a vice president of a bank, so we go over to talk to the guy. Me and Ralph, we get dressed up real nice. Ralph got on a nice silk gray suit, one of his pimp suits. I got on one of my three-piece suits. I tied back my hair, and we were quite the couple. So we walk into the local bank, and they show us to the back, so we walk through where the tellers are, and Ralph's like looking around real slow, like he's casing the place. So I say to Ralph, Ralph, we ain't here to steal money, we're here to borrow money. So I wasn't quite sure Ralph got the distinction, but we proceeded to the room where the guy sits down. He's sitting there at this big, huge conference table. That's it. Piece of paper in front of him. And we sit down, and he says, let me introduce myself to you, Mr. Moore. I'm friends with Lenny. We go back a long way. We went to law school together. There should be no trouble getting a loan. I said, that's great. He said, I have to ask you a few questions. I go, well, that might not be so great. So he says to me, he says, how long's Mr. Moore been working with you? I said, a couple years. He says, how much he make? He says, well, I co-signed the loan. I say yes to all those. So he's writing it down. He looks like, well, maybe you can get the loan. He says to Ralph, he says, have you ever done business with our bank? So I'm saying, I don't know if he did. He says, yes. And I go, it's not bad. He says, well, what did you do? He says, well, I took withdrawals from the bank. So the guy says, you must have had a checking account. He says, I don't suspect you have the number. He says, no, I didn't have a checking account. He says, savings account. No, I didn't have a savings account. You had savings plans. No, I didn't have any savings plans. He said, well, I have to ask you then, how did you withdraw money from our bank? He says, at gunpoint. He says, I did time for robbing a branch of your bank in Philadelphia. So the guy, he picks up this piece of paper where he's taking notes on, like it had anthrax on it. No. And he says, well, I'll get back to you. So we walk out, Ralph said, how'd I do? He says, I told the truth. I said, great, Ralph. I said, but you're either going to walk to work or I'm going to have to lend you the money. So Ralph says, okay. So I lend him the money. He says, I'll pay you back, I promise. So it comes about 2 years later, and I find out that Ralph gets arrested. So I go see him. I said, what's up? He says, Lenny, I couldn't get the money for you, so I robbed the bank.